This is a brief overview of the life cycle perspective as it applies to the ISO 14001 standard. And again, we are working with a lot of companies in the last couple of years to help them upgrade their programs to the 2015 standard, trying to show them how to implement a life cycle perspective in their environmental programs and just what that means for their organization. And we're seeing a number of different, we'll call them alternate interpretations of what a life cycle is, how it applies to the environmental standard, and how organizations should implement those. So here's the definition of a life cycle as defined by the ISO 14001 2015 standard. It's the consecutive and interlinked stages of a product or service. And this is your product or the service that you provide. From the raw material acquisition of the materials, through your production, through the use of your product, and then final disposal. So that is the life cycle of your product. And we'll talk a little bit more about how to identify the aspects relative to those things. So again, just a brief overview of an app's life cycle perspective. If you've got your basic piece of electronic equipment, an iPad, a laptop, they show a lot of impact when you acquire the materials. We've got to mine some silver, some gold, some cadmium, some chromium, some lead. All those materials go into the electronics, and those mining impacts are significant. The production process generates a fair amount of impact. There's a lot of impact during the distribution of the electronics because we've got to get these out to all of the Best Buys and Circuit Cities. Is there even a Circuit City anymore? ABC warehouses across the country. The use of the product doesn't create much of an impact, but then the final disposal or recycling of the product can create a significant impact. The other example here is an automobile. Again, we acquire a lot of these materials: steel, aluminum, plastics from oil, from the earth. We manufacture all the components that go into a vehicle, creating a pretty significant impact in production. The distribution impacts are not too intense. But the biggest impact of the automobile is in the use of the automobile. The consumption of gasoline, diesel, the combustion of those things, which creates air emissions, the servicing of the vehicle, which creates waste oils and used oils, all create a pretty significant impact on the environment. And then the recovery or the final recycling of the vehicle can be pretty environmentally rigorous as well. So those are the various what we call stages of a life cycle. And what the ISO organization has asked us to do is two things. One is we're supposed to identify aspects from a life cycle perspective, and then once they're identified, we're supposed to try to control them. So here's a pretty robust description of a life cycle from the Ricoh company. They have a very rigorous sustainability program, and if you want to look at their website, you can find this particular graphic. But again, when you look at the life cycle stages of a product, many of my customers are parts manufacturers. So they produce a part. That gets put into a vehicle. That vehicle gets sent to a car lot to be sold. It's sold to the user. The user, if they're doing it right, maintains the vehicle through the life of the product. After the product has been used up to the extent that it can be, goes to a collection center. Maybe they pull some parts off that can be recovered, used parts. And that probably goes more into the maintenance process than into a new vehicle. Goes to a recycling center, so we can pull off some recyclables. Then it goes back into into a shredder, which then goes back into the material manufacturing process. So again, it's a pretty nice graphic relative to demonstrating kind of this life cycle of any of our products. A couple of other training programs that we put together to help organizations with their environmental management system. First is our EMS champion training. This is a 6-hour webinar, and we're going to be offering this quarterly. It's great for somebody that's maybe new to the ISO program. Maybe they've got a strong safety program, but they're now in charge of ISO. It's going to be a real comprehensive overview of the ISO 14001 2015 standard, how to implement, what some best practices are, and then how to lead the program, how to get the organization to follow through with some things. And then we're providing this EMS leadership training, which again is a 90-minute overview, which is a great program for managers, because under the ISO program, managers must now demonstrate leadership, commitment, and accountability for the effectiveness of their environmental management system. They're starting to be audited more significantly, interviewed. And this particular 90-minute webinar really gives them the tools they need to be successful. It explains some of the new words, risk and opportunities, intended outcomes of the management system, life cycle perspective, etc. So those would be a couple of programs I would suggest. And you can always find those on our website, www.iso14001-training.com. And that message was brought to you by EHS Management Strategies. Thank you. Again, when you look at the standard, it talks about a life cycle perspective in 2 elements. The first one is 6.1, identification of aspects. Once we've identified aspects, 8.1 says we're going to control them. What are the operational control requirements? Now, in this particular video, we're going to focus on just the aspects identification piece. How do we identify aspects from a life cycle perspective? So again, here's your basic picture, which shows you kind of the connection between an activity, an aspect, and then the impact. So the definition of an aspect is it's an aspect of our products, activities, or services. This is the product that we produce, the activities that we conduct, and then the services that we can provide if we're a service organization. So most organizations I deal with are manufacturers. They have a few aspects related to their products. Most of their aspects are related to their activities. So here again is an activity, which is oil storage. The aspect is the potential for there to be a leak or spill. And then the impact would be land or water pollution. So again, the basics here is we have an organization that conducts activities, produces products, or provides services. These activities, there's an aspect of the activity that impacts the environment. And then there's an impact to the environment. So my example here is we have a compressed air system. One of the aspects of that activity, when we operate a compressed air system, one of the aspects is the fact that it consumes electricity. The consumption of electricity depletes natural resources. So it's that simple. We have an activity, we have an aspect, and then we have an impact. Another example would be we operate a compressed air system. We generate some oily condensate water, and that creates water pollution. So again, just the aspect basics there. How to identify an aspect. So now from a life cycle perspective, the first thing we have to identify is what are the activities that we do relative to the life cycle perspective. So in design, what do we do? Design of our product, design of our processes, what engineering and design activities do we do? Once we identify the activities, then we can determine, are there environmental aspects? The same with our procurement or material acquisition. We select vendors. We use natural resources. We have these things delivered to us. Production process, obviously, we produce our products. We have support staff. We have to manage our facility. And we also may outsource things like painting, heat treating, powder coating. Those would be considered outsourced services. Transportation, we transport our product to our customer. Occasionally, we might expedite some freight, which the plant managers don't like. We have to transport our waste from our site to the landfill, to the recycler, to the hazardous waste facility. Somebody uses our product, our customers use the product, and then at the end of the life of our product, it's disposed of. Now, in those two portions of the life cycle, we may not have any control or influence. And if that's the case, then we don't have any aspects to identify. So just keep in mind that at this stage of the game, all we're trying to do is identify aspects. And we're doing this now from a life cycle perspective. So if we take a look at the design and engineering process, what are some of the activities that we do, and what could be some of the aspects that they create? So under our product design, our design people, they select a material to make our product from. The aspect of that decision or activity is the recyclability of our product. We can influence the durability of our product. So by making our product more durable, have a longer life expectancy, this means that the vehicle that the part goes into, the washer, the dryer, has to be replaced less often. It can last longer. And it doesn't have to go in the shop for repair. And when we send our vehicle into the shop for repair, that creates a bunch of impacts. We've got used oil, used tires. The shop has to maintain their electricity. They have impacts. So by making our product more durable, we have indeed lessened the environmental impact. Tooling design. Again, when you design a tool, you may design it to have so much excess material, and I call that design scrap. It's not bad parts, it's just the fact that to process the material through our tool, we have this much excess material. And that's something we can control or influence. When we put a new cell in our process design, we put a new wash line in, we select the equipment. Well, that's an activity. The equipment has a certain energy efficiency. We can specify materials. So do I specify a 3-inch steel roll or a 3.5-inch steel roll? Well, I can do it with 3-inch, but I have a bunch of quality problems. So then I use a 3.5-inch, those go away. But then I have more scrap. We could select specific coolants or chemicals. And depending on the toxicity, that could influence our generation of hazardous waste. So those would be the activities and aspects associated with product design and process design. A lot of organizations have this very detailed design for the environment process. And again, this is a real big deal within the furniture manufacturing business. The steel cases and Herman Millers and Hayworths, they're all trying to be more sustainable than the other guys so they can show their products as being more environmentally friendly. But the standard doesn't require this of you, but when you take your life cycle perspective, these would be some of the issues that you could consider during your design process that might generate some aspects. Aspects relative to procurement. Again, the fact here, the environmental footprint of your supply chain is 4 to 10 times greater than that of your own operations. So if through your procurement, you can influence the environmental impact of your suppliers, you can in fact have a much more significant impact on the environment than just focusing on your own activities. So one of the activities that your purchasing company or department does is you select suppliers. You select new suppliers. Well, when you select that supplier, you kind of inherit their footprint on the product that they're sending you. So we want to deal with suppliers that are um, dependable, low cost, stable, and hopefully have a minimal environmental footprint. And anything that you do to encourage companies to be more responsible. So let's say that we expect our key suppliers to have a quality certification. Well, just that expectation that they have a quality certification impacts the environment, because I'm convinced that a company that has a quality certification has a better environmental footprint than one that doesn't. These guys are focused on scrap, customer satisfaction, efficiencies, material usage, transportation costs. And so just having that quality certification is you influencing their environmental footprint. When you select somebody, what is the distance to the supplier? Now, currently, you're probably focused on transportation cost. But usually, the transportation cost of any product is directly associated with the number of miles that they drive. Many companies are doing, source local, buy local, vendor consolidation programs, which reduces transportation impacts. You can specify the types of packaging you expect your supplies to come in. You can specify returnable dunnage. You might want things with a recycled content. Those would all be things that you do in your purchasing department that directly impact the environment. Environmental aspects relative to production. These are things you guys have been managing for years. These are the things inside of your fence line that you probably do a very good job identifying and managing. A couple of things to think about is trying to identify the aspects where we reuse materials, because reuse is better than recycling. So things like remelt and regrind. When you scrap a bad part out, that's got a tremendous impact. We took the material, it was transported to us. We made the bad part, so we wasted the electricity and the oils that it took to make it. We have to transport it to a recycling center, and they expend a bunch of energy to actually recycle it. So if we didn't produce the scrap, all those impacts don't become realized. And then other things like that deal with efficiency, like things like machine downtime. What is the environmental aspect of machines being down? Well, we produce less parts. We have the fixed utilities, electricity associated with our operations, and we produce less parts per kilowatt hour that we use. So there is an aspect associated with machine downtime. Transportation, again, we transport our product to our customer. That consumes diesel fuel and combusts diesel fuel. The transportation of our waste, our hazardous waste and used oils. Those are chemicals that when they're transported could spill during a traffic accident or other issue. We expedite freight, which causes us to use more diesel fuel and combust it. When we ship and receive our chemicals and oils, that creates a potential for there to be a possible spill. So those would be environmental aspects related to transportation. And then the use of the product and end of life, typically there's not a lot that most of us can do to control or influence how our product gets used or how our product is disposed of. There are some companies that do. There are a number of organizations that provide instructions to their customers on how to use their product to make sure that it's maintained properly and it lasts as long as it can. Our friends at BASF, they may produce a chemical that requires them to send an SDS sheet. They may have to tell the transporter, here's the hazards of our chemicals. In the design of an automobile, well, what are the design parameters associated with our product? I did an audit recently at a company who manufactures headlight assemblies. And they said, well, our environmental criteria are first the aerodynamics of the headlight assembly, the power draw, which influences the size of the alternator, and then the last is the weight of our product, because that influences the weight of the vehicle, which influences the fuel efficiency of the vehicle. Things like eco-labeling, labeling of components so they can be better recycled. Again, would be a way that we could influence the proper disposal of our product. But for most of us, there probably won't be a lot of activities or aspects associated with these two stages. And then ultimately, what we should end up with is an aspects matrix. And I didn't put this in here for you to read it, but one of the ways that we've taken a lot of aspects matrices and made them from a life cycle perspective is just by putting in these life cycle phases here, and then populating inside there the aspects associated with that phase of the life cycle. So for those of you that haven't had to upgrade your system yet, that's an approach you can take, and it's worked pretty effectively. Now, the next area in the standard where it talks about the life cycle perspective is in the development of operational controls. This deals with element 8.1 operations. Talks about the controls for our design and development process, production of procurement of products and services, outsourced processes, contractors, transportation of our product, and then the use and disposal of our product. We're going to cover that in our next video, so we'll talk more about that later. Again, my name is Jim Charles. Our company here is EHS Management Strategies. We spend 90% of our time inside of manufacturing facilities, conducting internal audits, helping companies to improve their management systems. One thing that we've been asked to do a lot lately is integration. So taking our quality program, environmental program, and now our health and safety program, and integrating those into one business system. A lot of organizations are going down that path. Training, again, we would do a lot of training, auditor training, so please think of us there. And we do a lot of compliance-related work, compliance evaluations, stormwater, SPCC plans, emergency response plans, etc. So there's my other plug for us. But again, here's my contact information. If anything that I've said doesn't make sense, feel free to get a hold of me either via email or phone. Definitely always appreciate questions, and I can also be recalibrated if my perspective on something isn't correct. But definitely appreciate your time taken to watch this video. And if you have any more questions, give us a call. Thanks.